All right, hello everybody. Welcome to this ecosystem restoration deep dive webinar. I'm very excited about hearing from our guest today, Willem Ferwerda. He's the founder and CEO of the Commonland Foundation. And a lot of you have probably heard about their work, and some of you maybe haven't yet. Really excited to hear about that. There's a lot of things in the world that exist because of Commonland. One of them being Al Vilal in Spain, which in turn helped support the first ecosystem restoration camp in Spain. So Commonland has really engaged this chain reaction of restoration of society and ecology in the world. So really grateful for your work, Willem, and welcome to the Deep Dive webinar.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yeah. Thanks.
All right. You want to start with a video?
Yeah, so I'm happy to I think it's good to start with a video. I think from an unusual country that is far away from the United States, but where most people think that we don't have any problems. But I just wanted to share some things we are doing with our partner in the Netherlands, just as a a different type of country, and to show what's happening there. And it also explains a bit about what we are doing and about what our methodology, how our methodology is working. So I'm sharing the screen now, and go to a video and hope it will work. So let's see. Yes. You see it?
Not yet. We'll get it. Try it one more time.
Beauty of life.
Oh no, I don't say. No, Willem, I don't see your screen yet. Hang on.
Oh dear. Okay. Oh, that's strange.
It's acting weird today, but
okay.
If we do it again, it'll work. There we go. I see it. Okay, good.
Okay.
Yes, everything's good.
Okay, here we go.
The beauty of life, of biology, of living things is that they have a capacity to heal.
Het leven op aarde is afhankelijk van de natuur. Ze geeft ons zuurstof, voedsel en bescherming. Door slecht gebruik van ons landschap en de bodem is een oppervlakte ter grootte van 2 keer China gedegradeerd. Het is vrijwel onmogelijk om te praten over klimaatverandering, voedsel- en waterveiligheid, droogtes en overstromingen en zelfs veiligheid en migratie, zonder het te hebben over het belang van duurzaam landgebruik en landherstel. De degradatie van landschappen beperkt zich niet tot hoogvlaktes, steppes, savannes of mediterrane ecosystemen. Ook veen is een landschapstype dat wereldwijd voorkomt en op veel plekken gedegradeerd is. Onder andere door ontwatering en ontginning. Als we kijken naar het Nederlands veenweidegebied, dan zien we een ogenschijnlijk groene oase. Maar ook hier neemt de kwaliteit van bodem en natuur af.
We zien dat de kwaliteit van de bodem echt aanmerkelijk aan het afnemen is. We zien dat het heel moeilijk is voor boeren om daar ook nog een goede boterham te verdienen. We zien bodemdaling en we zien de gevolgen van klimaatverandering.
Dit alles is het gevolg van een overheersende focus op financiële opbrengst per hectare. De economie past niet in de ecologie. Een onhoudbare situatie.
Je mergelt eigenlijk de grond uit. Op korte termijn lijkt het alsof je met kunstmest en bestrijdingsmiddelen hogere producties haalt. Maar voor de langere termijn ben ik ervan overtuigd dat dat alleen maar interen is.
While a tremendous amount of the planet is degraded, it's not the end of the road. We can absolutely turn what we're doing and correct all of these degradations, and that's a very hopeful, a very wonderful thing.
Het systeem moet anders. Niet alleen gericht op financiële winst, maar ook op sociale winst. en winst van natuurlijk kapitaal. Alleen dan is het toekomstperspectief hoopvol.
Stel je voor dat we over 20 jaar daar en daar zouden zijn. En dat het er zo en zo uit zou zien. Dat soort vergezichten, dat soort panorama's, de kracht daarvan is enorm.
Maar het stopt niet bij het schetsen van een gezamenlijk droombeeld. Om de transitie in het veenweidegebied te volbrengen, is het alle hens aan dek.
Dan hebben we een regering nodig, maar we hebben ook overheden nodig, maar we hebben ook de banken nodig, we hebben ook de retail nodig, we hebben de boeren nodig, we hebben de wetenschappers en de natuurorganisaties nodig. En vanuit het concept van 4 Returns kan je mensen ook heel gemeenschappelijk doel geven. En als ze een gemeenschappelijk doel hebben, dan zijn ze ook veel meer bereid om hier en daar wat in te leveren.
Die coalities zijn belangrijk, maar ook in de weerbarstige praktijk moet aan de systeemverandering worden gewerkt. Weiland brengt het 4 Returns framework van Commonland in praktijk, door concepten te ontwikkelen gericht op landschapherstel, bodemgezondheid, biodiversiteit en water. En die te testen met boeren.
We ondersteunen die pilot ook voor boeren om te gaan experimenteren met dit soort oplossingen, gewoon op hun eigen bedrijf. En wat ik zo belangrijk vind, is dat die boer vervolgens aan andere boeren kan vertellen waarom die dat doet.
Een enorm potentieel zit in de samenwerking tussen boeren en natuurbeheerders.
Natuurbeschermers kunnen veel leren van boeren. Boeren kunnen veel leren van natuurbeschermers. Maar dat gaat alleen gebeuren, ook dat gemeenschappelijke belang zoeken, samenwerken, als je ook elkaar begrijpt. En Commonland heeft daar, is zeg maar de accelerator daarvan geweest. Heeft ervoor gezorgd dat we dat ook veel nadrukkelijker zijn gaan doen. Met meer partijen rond de tafel zitten. En dat begint zijn eerste vruchten echt af te werpen.
Commonland deelt het landschap in 3 zones. 1 voor natuur, 1 voor economische activiteiten en een gecombineerde zone. In alle 3 de zones moet gewerkt worden aan landschapsherstel. Een bedreiging of kans is dat in het Nederlandse veenweidegebied geen beleid bestaat voor de gecombineerde zone.
Dan moet je realiseren dat landbouw natuurlijk eigenlijk gewoon een agro-ecosysteem is, waarin we allerlei functies van die natuur ook kunnen gebruiken. Dus hoe kan je dan, ik zou maar zeggen, in die gecombineerde zone zowel voedsel produceren als natuur laten ontwikkelen?
Net als iedere andere transitie kent ook de transitie van het veenweidegebied een financieringsvraagstuk. Nieuwe noodzakelijke investeringen kennen op korte termijn niet altijd. Maar in de 20-jaar-gedachte van Commonland volgt uiteindelijk rendement. Niet alleen financieel, ook ecologisch en sociaal. Zo wordt in het gebied ook weer inspiratie en perspectief geboden. De basis voor nog meer vitaliteit en activiteiten.
Voor ons is het een evenwicht. Hè? Hoe moet ik zeggen? We zijn er gewoon excessief. We hoeven het land niet meer op te jagen. Het is gewoon een rustige bedrijfsvoering. Meer een evenwicht.
So good afternoon. So this probably gives you an impression of what we are trying to establish in the Netherlands, and it's also maybe a different way of looking toward things from a very densely populated delta country in Western Europe. So yeah, what I can do, Tim, is just explain a little bit with some slides my story, and I'm very happy to answer questions or to go into more a deep dive on what we try to establish and learn from others as well. So I give the lead to you.
And for that part, for the question and answer, I want to remind everybody or let everyone know that there's the Q&A little icon on your screen there, and click that, and as you start to collect your questions, collect them in that box so that when we get to the question and answer session, we'll have them all there. So look forward to all your great questions, and put them in the Q&A box. All right.
So then I'll just start my story. And actually, do you see the slide? I hope it's working.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, very good. So, you know, basically my background is I'm a tropical ecologist, and I studied in Latin America, in Colombia many years ago. Started working in the field on the edge of agriculture and conservation, and have been working before I started Commonland in 2013. I have been working for more than 17 years in the international conservation world as a director of IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And I was able to work with NGOs on conservation issues, local land tenure issues, indigenous rights issues for many, many years in more than 40 countries. However, let's say in 2009, 2010, I realized that, you know, although it was beautiful work supporting local NGOs, this wasn't the way to get to scale. And getting to scale, we need to think in a different way. We need to realize what economics means and so on. And I left the organization in 2012 and started to develop a framework that was practical to help local people to think in a way differently and transform landscapes to more regenerative practices, and especially degraded landscapes. But therefore, I needed to do my homework and come up with a framework that would be accepted by experts, as well as governments, but also be practical and workable for you know, people in the field. So I'm basically going through some slides to show you what my story is and how it has been evolved over the last few years with Commonland, and why we are working now in almost more than 10 countries in the world to build a track record, make sure that this is working. So maybe you probably already know that large part of the world is very degraded. And the reasons are, you know, conversion, overgrazing, infrastructure work, the deforestation, overexploitation, agriculture, and especially efficient monocultures, pollution, etc., etc. And then you have climate change that is adding up to all these things. Those areas are almost everywhere, in poor countries, in rich countries. And you can look into many maps all over the world. But basically what you see is that, especially in deforested areas, this is going very quickly, but also in areas where grasslands, originally grass ecosystems are overgrazed, those areas turn into artificial deserts very soon and very quickly. So the world is rapidly degrading due to all kinds of economic activities. And if you look into what landscape restoration can do, then that will offer a huge opportunity and a potential to help solving a lot of issues. But of course, landscape restoration isn't only about biodiversity restoration. It is tackling a lot of these so-called sustainable development goals. It has to do bring back vegetation cover and humidity. Closed canopies will help to create again the evaporation pump system. So there's a lot of things that is beneficial if you deal with restoring the ecological functionality of landscapes. So let me, because I don't know how much you all know about this, but you probably have you probably know a lot about how these things are working. And if you don't, please let me know. But basically what I wanted to see is how, and that was my quest in 2011 and 12, is how can I create a practical approach that enables scaling up for all, scaling up of, let's say, landscape restoration by large investable areas or large investable projects, because we can't only live from subsidies or grants. We need to make sure that that farmers can transform their landscapes and other landowners in such a way that those large areas give a kind of a return. But what is a return? Mostly we're talking about a financial return, and the current system is mostly about maximization of financial returns, and that always leads to degradation. So I very carefully looked into the example of the Lus Plateau in China with my friend and colleague John D. Liu. I've been there several times, and if you look towards what happened in the Lus Plateau when the Chinese government started in 1994 to restore that huge area, is that many people were lifted out of poverty, and a switch started from low-value agricultural products and commodities to high-value products like apples and fruit trees. Not only the income of farmers doubled, but also the employment diversified. More and more different type of jobs. It gave rise to a lot of different jobs, and when you go there, you see a lot of different small industries popping up. And I think the business case in that Lus Plateau area was, when they started, was only to make sure that the sediment flow should go down, because that was the whole issue there. When they started to reforest that huge area, is that the sediment flow into the Yellow River caused a huge problem for the hydropower industry. But when they started to restore that area and reforest that area, an area now as big as the size of Belgium, 3.5 million hectares, they started with perennial vegetation, with tree cover, and increased the tree cover with a tremendous speed. So that learning from that huge example in China, it's one of the biggest restoration projects worldwide. I realized that this is China, and when you look into China, they have one great benefit, and that is there's only one landowner, the Chinese government, and they decide. They do whatever they want. If they want to restore a huge area, they just do it. And if you are in the way, you need to move. And that is not the case in many other countries where you have a lot of different type of landowners, from private landowners like farmers or mining companies or agricultural companies to public lands, protected areas, and so on and so on. And therefore, we need a kind of a social and financial and ecological framework that you can squeeze into some entities that people understand fast and well, and that you can monitor and measure. And that one approach, that was my quest. Yes, and this approach basically is very different than the current approaches of what you could say see now at landscape level. You see that the current business model is a financial return or maximization of financial returns per hectare. That is the business model almost everywhere in the world, and that leads to degradation in all the places you can see. It causes deforestation, over-exploitation, if you look into wildlife, for instance, and also the soil fertility goes down, erosion. All these things are coming from that one business model, maximization of financial returns per hectare, quite often in a very short period. So how to frame systemic and long-term framework, or how to create a systemic and long-term framework that is based on business cases, how to do that well in such a way that people want to accept it and want to use it and want to step into it and just do it. And quite often I use this figure going from ego to eco to show to corporates but also farmers that the current system doesn't lead to the current, you could say, ego or very hierarchical system is leading to destruction, while the more circular system, the ecosystem on your right side, is very different. And also we need to understand that that we need to go to a very different system that ask from ourselves transformational change. To make it easier, I went to those places, to those very degraded areas in Turkey, in India, in the United States, in the UK, in Spain, in Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, so in many places in the world. And I interviewed farmers and I interviewed investors. Investors in New York, in Frankfurt and Amsterdam, and in the other places I just mentioned, I interviewed farmers. And I asked them basically two questions. The first question was, what is your biggest frustration? And the second question was, what is your biggest dream? And when I realized that the farmers everywhere, in almost all the places in the world, whether they were poor or rich, they had more or less the same frustration and the same dream. And the frustration was that they couldn't hand over their land in a better condition as they had received it from their parents. And their biggest dream was that they should find a business model that would be willing to pay for their way of being a steward of the land, not only for massive production, but also for being a steward for the land and for the soil and for those other species that were on that land. The investors, and those were mostly institutional investors, they had a different way of looking to things. When I asked them about their frustrations, they said, listen, when I really, it's a bit tough to share our biggest frustrations, but they're more about the next generation. Our kids are not any longer interested in what I'm doing because they see and they read that the current investments are still in you could say the degradation industry. And even if we start to invest in more sustainable projects, those sustainable projects are doing less harm than the conventional ones, but they're still doing harm. They're not building up something new, or they're not positive. They're just less negative. And their frustration was that they couldn't find a dialogue with their children, for instance, the next generation, as this younger generation was ultimately always criticizing that we need to go to a new kind of investment system. So their dream was to find pipeline investable projects that are really doing good, and that those projects were much more connected to the land, to, let's say, ecosystems, than the more superficious projects that they were currently investing in. So investors had also a kind of a purpose. They were looking for a kind of more. Of course, these were institutional investors. That means that they were investing money from large banks or governmental institutes, pension funds. So that brought me to the idea that I really wanted to make a model that was easy to understand. And when I really talked to those farmers, I thought, basically degradation is about 4 losses. You lose biodiversity in an area. In those areas, people have lost their jobs because they have lost economic activities. Most of those areas are abandoned, they're empty. People are leaving, going to cities. But if you talk to the farmers and to the people still living there, quite often they have lost their sense of purpose. They have lost their sense of meaning, and they lost their pride. So if we want to turn that around, restoration and restorative landscapes should give 4 returns. First of all, you need to bring back inspiration, hope. And the second thing is you need to create jobs. And if you can do that well, then you can start talking or already start talking while you're creating jobs on how to bring back vegetation cover, soil health, humus, compost, and biodiversity, and of course water flows in that natural system. How can you kickstart that natural system, or the system again? And then, based on these 3 returns, you can gradually work on what are the best ways to earn your money in that new system. And that means you need to look into more regenerative agroforestry systems, or regenerative grassland systems, etc., etc., etc. So that's when we started with, let's say, the 4 returns. Return of inspiration, giving people hope and a sense of purpose. Return of social capital, bringing back jobs, business, activity, education, and security. Return of natural capital, restoring the biodiversity, the soil, the water quality, bringing back carbon into the soil. And return of financial capital, that is realizing long-term sustainable profits by doing things in a different way, creating new business models. But that is not enough. If you want to maximize those 4 returns, you need to go and look into a large, you could say one ecosystem approach, where you apply a 3-zone methodology. That is where you identify where is a natural zone and where should you restore nature and wilderness. Where do you want to create, or where do you want to restore ecological corridors between protected areas? That is what we call the nature zone, or the natural zone. And then you have the economic zone, and basically the economic zone, or mostly in those areas, is economic activities like fabrics and so on, machinery, but also infrastructure, roads. And the economic zone is just a given. I mean, you need to look carefully how you can make that more sustainable, but it's important to identify the economic zone. The economic zone mostly is also it also includes monocultures, large areas, and you know them in the United States, in the Corn Belt and so on. Large areas of one cropping systems with a high demand of water and a high chemical input. So what quite often is lacking, and you probably saw that in the small documentary on the Netherlands, is the combined zone. I realize that in many places in the world, the combined zone is just not existing. You have natural zones, protected areas, and you have economic zones, whether they're cities or monocultures, or mining areas or whatever, or industrial areas. But the combined zone, where you combine, let's say, the ecological functions of an area and use those ecological functions to create a high yield of a variety of crops, or wildlife, or rotational grazing, whatever you name it. Those areas are not very common in the world. And I think that we need to think more in combined and mixed, or combined zones, to enlarge the food production while you enlarge or increase the biodiversity, that is the natural resilience of the system. So 4 returns are delivered by 3 zones, and then you need to add time. And for investors, time is a critical issue, because investors want to exit a project at a certain moment. And we, as ecologists or agricultural investors, or regenerative agriculture, just say, okay, let's add 1 generation, a period of 20 years or more, not less. We need to have time to develop this. And if you look into large areas, this really costs a lot of time. So 4 returns are delivered by a 3-zone landscaping zoning approach for a period of 20 years or more. That is, you could say, the theory. 4 returns, 3 zones, 20 years. And yes, if you carefully look at what we did our homework. We did a whole monitoring and evaluation system behind it. So each return you can look at, you can monitor and evaluate with different KPIs or different entities, where you can measure the values that comes out of those returns. And that is important for investors, and that is important for farmers, but also for scientists and ecologists to see, if you bring this approach to the field, how can we make sure that it is working, and where can you steer or help to or learn and change things to make sure that those returns and the zoning approach is becoming well established. And so we have now developed a whole monitoring evaluation system, and we are every year we are testing this in the areas we are working. So that is basically, in a summary, in a nutshell, that is the theory of 4 returns, 3 zones, 20 years. A new way, a new framework that helps people, rural people on the land, but also people, local authorities, to get a common vision of a large restorative initiative. So what is Commonland? Because when I wrote this down in 2013, I wanted to make sure that I was able to do this. A theory is just a theory, but if you do it and you can make sure that it works, then you. I needed to start to build up an organization. I found an organization to hire people and make sure that we could do that with the best people and work in some areas. So we started with a non-profit organization that developed the 4 returns framework and started to use it. And we started to build and working in 4 countries: the Netherlands from 2015 onwards, in Spain, Australia from 2014. And in 2013, we stepped into an existing project in South Africa. So those 4 countries are very, very important to show how and to learn for us how this framework would work. So what is our role? Basically, our role in a nutshell is creating the right conditions at a local level to make scale possible. And let me explain. So yes, we work with 5 teams. We have a 4 returns landscape team that is working in those 4 countries with local teams. We use the Theory U methodology to create stakeholder alignment, and we do that regularly every few times a year. We now also started with the advisory services because other parties are coming to us, local governments, but also entities like the Red Cross or the Nature Conservancy. They want to work with us to learn from how this model is working. And then, of course, we have the monitoring, evaluation, and the science and education group of people. And that team is is not only working on M&E, but also on showing how this 4 returns model is working towards the business and the more academic communities. And we have several MOOCs going on now. The next massive online course will start in February. And the first one has been running online now for a year or more. And then, of course, communication and outreach, although our communication is still pretty weak, because we have been focusing on doing the work in the field. So let me explain how we do this. So normally we start, let's say, for 1 to 4 years with the scouting. Where can we work? Where are the conditions in such a way that that we can start working in an area? Quite often we are asked to work in a certain area, but that area should be big, a few 100,000 hectares. People should be, and it's quite often the people who live there, farmers, are in crisis. The current agriculture system isn't working anymore. The young generation have left to the cities, so houses are abandoned. And then you have things like erosion, climate change, and deforestation that make things worse, of course, and overgrazing. So people who are in crisis are more receptive for transformational change than people who aren't in crisis. And we see that difference, for instance, in the Netherlands and in Spain. In Spain, the farmers are in crisis. They want to change, and they go very fast. in the Netherlands, which is a wealthy green country, the farmers and many people think, don't understand that we are living in a very degraded peat meadow system. So there it is more difficult to change, although we have the issue of the rise of the sea level that makes it tough. So probably the crisis or the feeling of a crisis is coming one day or another. So that is the scouting period. Very carefully look, where can we work? Are all the conditions met to start a long-term process in a large area like Spain or Southern Africa? Size is important as well. The bigger the area, the better you can restore that area, because then ecology can work for you if you identify the acupunctural points in that landscape where you can start. Because with a very good ecosystem science and so cultural understanding, you can with small pilots in such a landscape already do a lot of things. That takes time, the scouting period. As soon as we have identified an area, we start with a local stakeholder management process, or the social engineering process, or whatever you call that. And therefore we use the U, as you can see here at year one. We bring local stakeholders together, share them how the framework is working, and identify on the maps where the zones could be and what kind of different way of working we could establish during a 20 years approach. Here we create the common vision. Then with a common vision, we move towards the first steps into the landscape design phase. And if we on the map have established, let's say in general, where we want to establish different zones, the 3 zones, or if people have a better understanding of what those zones means, we start also towards business development phase, where we, together with those farmers, identify what type of businesses can we establish there, what type of different agricultural companies are needed, or farmer practices are needed, from monocultures to regenerative agroforestry systems, all these things, or from like what we do in South Africa, from overgrazing and goat keeping to aromatic oils. That is a huge change for people living in those areas, and sometimes have been doing similar things for generations. After a while, if we are able to establish the right businesses and companies, the financial and the financial modeling comes in, and then we need, of course, to raise funds. Whether those funds are raised from grants or philanthropy or public money, subsidies, or commercial funding, investments, that all depends on what kind of things we are doing there. So let me take you a little bit, and then you go, from year 3 to 4, basically you start to create scale. So let me dive a little bit deeper into what we are doing in those 4 areas. So now in 2013, as I said, we started in 4 areas: the Baviaanskloof water catchment of Port Elizabeth of 550,000 hectares, the Altiplano in Andalusia, eastern Andalusia and Murcia, a dry area, 1 million hectares and 1,000 meters altitude. The western part of Australia, and especially the wheat belt, a huge area of 16 million hectares, where we started in an area of 300,000 hectares. And as you've seen in that video, the peat meadow system around the capital of the Netherlands, Amsterdam, an area densely populated. The other 3 areas are very poor populated, are abandoned almost. And it resulted in a few years that we now have started in each area a social, you could say, ecosystem restoration partnership, and also in those areas a company. And in all those areas, more companies will follow, and those companies are the driver of change, because those companies need commercial money or investments, and we foresee and we hope that those companies make the growth possible. But you cannot start with companies. You first need to create a breeding ground of, you could say, a partnership. And that partnership takes time and costs energy and takes maintenance. And you need to bring in that maintenance for a minimum period of 20 years. It will not go, it doesn't grow just normally. You need to fuel that, bring people together, make sure that they feel the inspiration and want to make that change themselves. And we experience gradually that this is going sometimes faster than we even thought. So, how do we create that leverage? In South Africa, for instance, we started, this is just an example, we started to restore, with our local partners, living lands and grounded, we started to restore, and the local farmers, of course, the hillsides. And we were able to raise, with a 100K investment or subsidy from grants, we were able to raise 1.4 million euros for the restoration of the hillsides after we were able to bring down the number of goats there, and the goats now have left. And this was, of course, in a combination with starting aromatic oils industry there. And we were able to raise funds, different funds from investors, to start a distillery plant there. In Spain, and we'll go a little bit deeper into these examples. In Spain, we started with a working capital to bring people together and start the first investment from Commonland itself to kickstart a company, a regenerative almond company. And this almond company has a huge potential because the number of hectares that are now in that area, you could say in a monocultural situation, is more than 125,000. And if we are able to change that number of 125,000 hectares into an agroforestry almond system, and that is the objective of the Almendragesa company, then we create a huge combined zone that is that has a closed canopy, and that will provide not only almonds but also honey, also aromatic oils, and maybe other tree species, fruit species, that will increase the yield of that area tremendously, and thus the income of farmers. But it also will sequester more carbon. It will also retain more water and increase the biodiversity. And in Australia, we were able to create, with some seed capital of 250K, create culture. And that company, with our Australian partners, they started it in 2014. That company went to the Australian Stock Exchange in July last year, 2018. And were able to raise 3.5 million euros to kickstart organic vegetables in shade houses, combined with the restoration of natural zones. This is a very special story, because we thought it was almost impossible to sell a holistic restoration company on, let's say, the public market. But the magic here was that farmers who were living there started to become shareholders, because they understand that we need to have that change. So let's go a little bit deeper into into how we work if we enter an area. So in the creating conditions phase, after the scouting, we bring together with our networks. Mostly we are invited to go there. We start with a U process, and we work together with the Presidency Institute in Boston, and with their help, we are able to find the right trainers who can help us to create a common vision using the theory U as well as the 4 returns, a common vision for people in their landscape. quite often there is no common vision anymore, and there's no hope in those areas. People have really lost their sense of purpose, and by combining the right technical and scientific information, ecological information, with their own situation, and that it is possible, by also showing other examples, to change their current situation, we create a process of co-sensing. And this co-sensing actually is leading to a new way of a new plan. And this gives you an example, for instance, this slide on what happened in Spain. When we came there in 2014, we brought a core group of farmers together. And those farmers weren't organized. The only thing is they were all very much aware of the current problems and situation, and they were very open for change. And we sat together several days, and we asked them, how do you see your country? What is the country you would like to see in 2034, 20 years later? And they all said, we want to go to a regenerative green countryside where agroecology is the new way of life, where the mountains in our area are the green lungs, where we have a society of solidarity, where we work together in alliances, and where the local government is helping us, where the people are coming back. And when we asked farmers, what is your real dream in that area? They all said, we want to have the schools open again. They didn't say anything about biodiversity or tree planting. They wanted to have the people coming back again. But when you were able to combine that with the ecology of an area, and that you can make that link very fast, they were very open. And gradually, based on this U process, we were able to create a whole plan, a for returns restoration plan. And if you look in this area, you see, the area. It's a huge area of 1 million hectares. It's over here in Spain. It's very dry. The current agriculture system is you have some cereals, but most of the area is almonds, rain-fed almonds. But the rainfall is going down and down. People leave the area to the cities, Madrid, Granada, Sevilla, Almería, Murcia, and people lost hope in that huge area. The nice thing is that the north of the area, there's still protected park, Cazorla. In the middle, you have a small protected park, and in the south. So the Altiplano, the high plain, is very well situated. There is a potential of water, although the water doesn't reach the agricultural land anymore. Everything is eroded. The topsoil has gone. You see it over here. So people created over time a desert. And how to kickstart that desert? What we did is we started to design, and that's phase number 3, we started to create a landscape mapping design with the farmers, where we identified where do we need to kickstart reforestation or natural restoration projects, and where do we need to look into how we can start with which farmers, regenerative companies, a regenerative in this case almond company, because almond is the big crop over there. How can we start with hubs for composting? What do we need to do in that huge area to make sure that every drop of water is maintained? How can we restore water catchments? And are there other crops that we can use with a combination with almonds that will restore the fertility and the topsoil, as well as the carbon into the soil, but already gives a kind of financial return? And we turned up that aromatic oils is an important one. But of course, people have sheep over there, and that is part of their way of living. And of course, it's pretty difficult to find a way. How can you bring that into the system in such a way that those sheep are not the basis of overgrazing, but are part of the restoration agenda. And we started with combining the almendresa system, the regenerative almond system, with the rotation grazing. And we started to do a lot of piloting. And yeah, and that has now, in year 4, has now resulted in a farmers restoration association of more than 250 members. Governments and protected area managers are members as well. The company Almendresa has started with private investment capital, and the number of farmers that are willing to join as a member of this Almendresa company is rapidly increasing, and the first demand of regenerative almonds are already established and coming from Germany, the UK, and the Netherlands. So the movement has started, and more farmers are now creating swales in the landscapes to capture water, and started to talk to each other within WhatsApp groups, trainings, and meetings. And yeah, you could say the Portuguese movement is growing rapidly in Spain, much faster than we expected, actually, after 4 years now. So just let me tell you something. This was Spain. Let me tell you something about South Africa. So in South Africa, in the water catchment of Port Elizabeth, we found a 550,000 hectare area. And especially in the Baviaanskloof, a small NGO, Living Lands, was working here for several years, and they worked with the TRU already, but they didn't find the right business cases to make sure that the farmers could have could do something with the transformational processes they were in. When we came on board we realized that as soon as possible, we need to work with the farmers to find a different way of land use systems where they can earn more money than in the goat system they are now working on. This is a slide with a lot of words, but if you look, but I just wanted to show you look at this picture. So this is basically what we did. The current income of the farmers when we started there was goat keeping. But the number of their income was decreasing. The goats were especially used not only for meat, but especially for Angora wool. We wanted to help them to create in 5-year time a different system on the bottom floor with aromatic oils, nuts, and bringing the topsoil back in the bottom floor. While meanwhile, the goats, we wanted to bring the number of goats on the hillsides down and started to reforest the hillsides, which is a huge area, and maybe start even with game reserves over there as a potential extra income source. So where we are now is that we started with a farmers company, a cooperative, Baviaanskloof Development Company. You see the logo over here. Started the small as advisory services grounded and continued work with the local NGO who was working on the reforestation area. We created the holistic farm management plan, and now the holistic farm management plan is accepted by the farmers in 2015, and the factory and the first yields were established in 2017. The factory is open now since a year with a huge investment, and the beautiful thing is, the number of employment went up twofold, not only because of the farmers have more work now with the organic oils, but also we are creating a hub for restoration practitioners, and Living Lands is now the largest employer in that whole area. And of course, there's still money needed, but increasingly we are seeing that the demand for aromatic oils with this story behind it is growing. So that is what we are doing. So some images in the Baviaanskloof area of the Port Elizabeth water catchment. And just recently, Living Lands and Grounded also started with honeybush cultivation in the combined zone in another water catchment of the Port Elizabeth Valley. Yeah, Spain, I already explained you a little bit about Spain, about how we work there. I hope and here you see the picture. I think what is happening now there is revolutionary, and especially the speed is going. It's tremendous. While in South Africa you have historical problems, black and white issues, of course. Spain has a history of degradation for centuries and centuries, but increasingly you see a movement there, which is very powerful, of local farmers who really want this change. And for us, we are all very excited to see that the Almendrahesa company, and there will be more companies popping up, because we foresee that in this huge area there is space for maybe more than 50 companies that are doing regenerative practices. And yeah, if those companies can be, the pipeline for the investment world, we are able to tap into other sources of income. And that, of course, the goal. The interesting phenomenon, what happens now in Spain, is that people from other areas outside the territory are now talking to this Alvalal. Alvalal is the Farmers Landscape Restoration Association with more than 250 members now, and they really want to learn how what they are doing, what their vision is, and so on and so on. And with the monitoring evaluation schedule we have set up, we see that they are increasingly becoming proud on what they have established so far. So Spain is a very important area for us to learn, to see how this is working, and we are very interactive with Alvalal and the Almendrahesa company. So here's a little impression of the Spanish Alvalal team, the board of the Alvalal Farmers Association. The first products: almonds, almond oil, regenerative almonds, and regenerative almond oil. Here you see the difference between after 1.5 years of regenerative almond practices and still the conventional way of plowing and without green cover and so on. The restoration activities with planting small holm oak trees, water catchment with swales to capture all the drops of water, creating new ponds and new water systems in the drylands. All these things are now happening in Spain. Yeah, and then Western Australia. Western Australia we looked into Western Australia already several years ago as a very good area to work, to do this work, but we didn't have a network until the end of 2014, when a farmer and an entrepreneur came to us and said, "This is what we want to do. We are from the wheat belt. The wheat belt is a huge area, completely deforested, a huge problem with salination, less rainfall, and actually the area is not always very suitable for cereals, as the name is, or will tell you, wheat belt." This was all a very diverse eucalyptus forest before the British came there, and it was cleared in less than 120 years. So they started to they set up a company, Wide Open Agriculture, a company that was producing, and they focused on first producing healthy foods, because one of the things is it's difficult to get good veggies in that area. While you can produce those good veggies if you have access to land and do it in a good way. And with producing veggies, they want to bring in people. And with people, they start a community. And with that community, they wanted to, and they are working on restoring land. So they started with land for reasons and food reasons under the Wide Open agriculture company. And you might argue, why didn't they start with a local foundation of farmers? Actually, that was pretty. People living there, the area is huge, and Australians are more used to, let's say, a company as a starting point than another NGO or a green NGO that not always isn't reflecting always the right way of working. So we started with a company in Spain, and we helped those people to establish wide open agriculture. And this year, wide open agriculture became listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, and was able to raise commercial money, to our surprise in a way. But farmers are stepping into it. They understand that they need to change. And this year we also started with a U process with farmers and scientists and local conservationists in that area. And we will continue there. So just give you some examples of Spain, of a regenerative wheat farmer here. The wheat, the shade house where they produce healthy food, veggies. An example of one of the last forest areas that is protected. The rest is all, agriculture cleared. And this year in July, August, when they reached the IPO and were able to list wide open agriculture. Here you see regenerative practices in a wheat area, so different type of wheat and beans. And here you see a protected area and cropping altogether in the shade house. So the Netherlands, you already saw some examples of what's happening in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, let's say briefly. Go through this very fast because I think I need to stop talking and listen to your questions. But we have a huge problem in the Netherlands. One third of our country is peat meadow, and a peat meadow system that is going down very rapidly. Salination is coming up also because of the sea level that is rising, but the biggest problem is that the peat meadow system actually isn't working anymore as a productive area for milk. It is much more an area that is producing a lot of carbon dioxide, and the future proof of the business model of the peat meadow system is no longer valid, you could say. It's not the milk production and the way of producing now. The productive system in the peat meadow system isn't future proof. We need to look into more nature inclusive farming models. We need to look into more ways of bringing up in a little bit the water table. We are talking about a peat system. We are talking about a swamp system. So what can you produce in swamp systems? Is that more, do we need to think in agricultural instead of livestock? All these things are now under discussion, and we set up a farmers group now, supported by some philanthropy foundations and the Dutch government, and the first pilots are now underway, as you've seen in the video. Here, climate change is a very important actor as well, because we foresee that if carbon prices are going up, these carbon prices will help to restore the peat meadow system, and that will be beneficial also for infrastructure and for protecting us against sea level rises. So we are just in the first phase, in the first few years, and we are testing agriculture. We are testing different ways of producing milk and cheese. And we are testing. We're doing a lot of soil testing. What type of soil is the best way to look into? How can that work with the farmers going forward? And what type of fibers or water ferns can grow in those areas that are economically viable as well. Yeah, and I'm almost coming to an end of my presentation, but another thing what we do is we present all those cases into massive open online courses and combine those business students with field visits to those farmers in those forest landscapes. And you will find more on the web. If you Google a business approach to sustainable landscape restoration with the Rotterdam School of Management and Commonland, you'll get access to this MOOC. So summarizing, how do we see financial leverage over time within this for returns framework at the landscape level? Our experience so far is that we need to create the right conditions by bringing people and local landowners and local governments and protected areas together within a landscape, within an ecosystem. And that ecosystem needs to be defined. What is the area where we want to work in? What is the size of that area? Is it a water catchment? Is it an altiplano or a peat meadow delta system? And what is more or less the area where we want to work? And to create this U process well, and to repeat this U process well, this is a process where you need to hire people, where you need to train inspired, where they meet each other, where they learn. That process takes time and costs money. We call that the social engineering part. And that is also the part where we develop new business models. So that is the yellow part. What we do is we raise funds, grants or subsidies to make sure that we can do this well. The first projects in the field already start in year 1 and year 2, and that could be tree planting projects, water swales managements, let's say all kind of water capture activities, starting with local composting areas, activities, and so on. And mostly you start with grants here as well. But gradually, after a few years, you're able to develop the first companies that attract commercial money. And here we are. This is the big chunk where you want to go. But you need always a smaller part of grants and subsidies for all those innovative things that cannot find investment or commercial money yet. And you need to continue with the social engineering or the social creating conditions part, and that will always cost money. But this type of money is relatively small if you compare to where you can go here, and where you can also go with the public funding. So over time, you see a change from philanthropic and grants money towards public money and especially commercial money. And that is what we want to achieve, from creating conditions to creating scale. To create the conditions and to maintain the conditions, we work, as I said before, with the theory U, which is a process of bringing stakeholders together and learning from each other with an open heart and listening to each other, and that is crucial to the success of restoring a whole landscape, a whole area, and to make sure that they stick to this for returns and zoning approach. You need to look from different perspectives with different stakeholders towards the landscape, and to create a common understanding of what is the real problem here and how can we solve that together. The ULAB is crucial for creating restoration partnerships, and you can't stop with it. Not after 5 years, not after 10 years. You probably can stop and do it with less intensity, but sometimes problems pop up and you just need to come together and solve that together. And the U methodology is critical and super powerful to do that well. So I think this is almost my last slide. If you measure the returns over time, what you see, and this is that let's say the first few years, the financial returns are going down because farmers change from one business model, a conventional business model, to a more regenerative and restorative business model. And so you need to help them to cover this period. Sometimes this period can take like 5 or 6 or 7 years, and sometimes it goes faster. But this is the tip you need to cover. You need to find income, or you need to find other sources to help them to close that gap. Immediately after you start working in a different way, biodiversity will go up. And it will go up and up and up and up until it reaches more or less a climax. The inspiration return is a tougher one. It goes up fast, and then it can go down. And you know, this yellow line, you know, in reality, it should be more like this. It will go up if you maintain the U process, but it will go up with ups and downs, and that's how people work and how it goes. It's critical to have leaders in areas and to work together with leaders who are connected to the area and don't want to leave that area. More predictable is the social capital, the social, you know, creating jobs in those areas. Yeah, in the beginning it can go fast, and at a certain level it reaches its maximum until new developments and new technologies start, which you cannot always predict. But what we already see now is that agroforestry landscapes is inspiring, and people want to be part of it. So we already see in Australia and also in Spain that a younger generation comes back, and they want to stay there if you create the right conditions. And that's what we try to achieve. Still one slide about more for policy people, and that is to show how we see the SDGs connected to the 4 returns and to the number 17 of the SDGs. This is number 17 is about creating long-term meaningful partnerships. And we use as I said before, we use the Theory U methodology. And if you do that, that you can work at a landscape level to restore an area and with those resulting in those 4 returns, and this is actually reaching out to many of those SDGs. And as many companies and governments are working with the SDGs, it is important for us to adhere to their language and explain to them how we are not only working on SDG, Sustainable Development Goal number 15 on land, but that also water, sanitary, climate change and other issues are important here, and that at the end you will create at the local level a more a social system that hopefully also create more prosperity. So this slide always brings down a lot of discussion, but it's good to have those discussions with policymakers. So yeah, as a last overview, we are working now we still continue to work in those 4 areas where we want to learn more and build our track records. Most of the things, some of the things you can already find on the web, but most of our learners are not yet published. We are still learning, you could say. And increasingly now we are working with others through our advisory service for returns partners in places like, we are starting this year in India. We are working with the Red Cross in Haiti and with a local investor in Argentina, with the UN Capital Development Fund. We started in Tanzania, and with an investor and we started in Kenya, while with the Peace Park Foundation and Conservation NGO we are working in Zambia. So these what we foresee is that that increasingly more and more corporates, governments, but especially farmers want to work with this 4 returns framework, we see that it helps them to understand their situation and give them the tools to do things in a different way. And that is where we stand for. That is what we want to enable. So my name, my function as a CEO is a Chief Enabling Officer. Instead of a Chief Executive Officer that you can find more in the corporate world. And I think that is what we want to establish. And thank you very much for listening to my Dutchy English. And I'm looking forward to hear your questions. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Willem. Can you unshare your screen?
Yep.
All right. All right, and we'll get to some questions. We got a lot of good questions here.
Very good.
Yes. All right. So we'll start at the top. I have a couple, but we're gonna get to these questions first. So Timothy O'Shea says, language is so important, I think. So why do we grant the term efficient agriculture to systems of industrial scale processed food production? Why do we allow our language to accept the framing of such conventions that we recognize as not working? Calling them efficient. Yeah.
Yeah, he is completely right. Basically, those systems are completely not efficient. So monocultures with a lot of chemical input are not efficient because you just don't work with nature. You work with the efficiency of nature. So efficiency here is, I think, is just a misuse. And what I mostly do is when I talk to those farmers, and they come to me, yes, that they have this efficient agriculture, is that you can start a conversation with those people, and especially also with corporates. Increasingly, corporates, for instance, come to us and they say, listen, Commonland sounds like a very idealistic organization with those 4 returns, because we only think in 1 return. And then I just tell them that we don't think we are idealistic. We think that we are realistic, and we think that they are idealistic to continue the way they're working. If they continue the way they are working now, they're just very idealistic. They're not with the boots on the ground. And words are super important, because then you start a conversation. So efficient agriculture means that basically it's not efficient. You're not using the natural system, the mycorrhiza, the microorganisms, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, I don't know whether that is an answer, but
okay. And at any time, if
that's how we see this.
Great. All right, and feel free to ask anything else if you want to follow up. And if we have an in-depth question, I can always pull somebody up to have a little chat if we want to do that.
Okay.
Another question from Timothy O'Shea. So this is a request. He's saying, so it's like the slow money approach. Request for that. Can we develop KPIs? I don't know what a KPI is, etc. To scope of evaluation as 20 years. With 5-year check-in milestones. I think you answered that kind of a lot after he mentioned it when you talked about the time frame, but is there anything else in there?
KPI is a key performance indicator. So when we talk about language, we also, what we try to do is bridge languages. So we sometimes use languages of investors, because otherwise, if we don't use their language, they will never step in, because they have no clue what we're talking about. But we also need to talk the language of farmers, of ecologists, and and cultural languages as well. I didn't mention art, for instance, but art is critical. So what we with our holistic system do is what we are in fact we are a little bit a chameleon in languages. We talk the language of investors, we talk the language of farmers, and we understand and talk the language of experts, so ecologists, foresters, and so on, and wildlife specialists. And we increasingly do understand and talk the language of artists. And but our dream and our goal is to create a holistic language. And I fully agree with the language issue. We need to create a new language. that works. And increasingly, we see that this is already working. So coming back to the KPI issue, we need to monitor and identify the key performance indicators. And if you look, for instance, to let's take the natural returns. What are the KPIs there? You could say the number of species that is increasing or decreasing. You can measure that. The number of the carbon in the soil, you can measure that. And especially in areas where you have degraded artificial deserts, you want to know what is the KPI, the key performance indicator for vegetation cover. You want to have an increase of vegetation cover, or you want to have a decrease of invasive species. That could be in KPI as well. So, or the humidity of the soil. So you water. But we need to focus on not too many things. We can have thousands of KPIs, but the strength of some performance indicators is you need to choose a few that people understand and that are measurable. Another example, return of inspiration. Wow, that is a tough one. And that is really a tough one to what is the key performance indicator? For instance, now we have learned that WhatsApp groups where farmers get inspired or inspire each other and learn from each other. But in Spain, for instance, another KPI you could say is together and train each other and learn from each other. So we have different WhatsApp groups there. We have different trainings groups there, and they all start to do it themselves. So that is but for instance, an example is in Spain and in Australia, but also in South Africa, the number of, let's say, more artistic way of thinking. People are getting more and more inspired by their own landscape and and start to become proud again. Pride is an important KPI as well. So, and you can measure that. Yeah. So that's
all right, great, thank you. Now we have a question from Verushka Kierkegaard. Hi, Verushka. In your opinion, what are the skills, experiences, or knowledge that are the highest in demand within your field of work? In other words, what lacks the most, and does one have an opportunity to apply for contribution or collaboration?
Oh, difficult one, because there's so many skills lacking. What we see is still a lot of knowledge is lacking. So ecological knowledge is lacking. People, farmers, but also, for instance, we call them the urban enthusiasts. So people from urban areas, well-educated young people come to us and want to work with us. And they, for instance, they have no idea what ecology is and how ecology works. Another skill is you need to have patience. Working with farmers and in transformation processes, you work with people, so patience is important. Financial modeling is important. I've learned, for instance, that if we cannot model this in a financial language, then investors will not be interested because they have their own language. But still, you need to build that bridge. So I think flexibility and openness to learn and not to judge is a skill. And another skill is patience and the willingness to, especially if you want to work and live there in those areas. Yeah, you just need to choose to stay and live there. So many skills are needed, but maybe the most important skill within each different skill set is the ability to be open for the other skills, because this is a multidisciplinary approach. You can't do this alone. With only experts and conservationists, you can't make this case. With only some farmers who are willing to change, it is not enough. At a certain moment, you need to convince investors or other sources of funding, and that needs a different skill set. So what we see is that the power is that this 4 turns 3 zones 20 years. On zone almost, you need different skill sets.
Right. Great. All right. Timothy O'Shea has another question. Thanks. Multiple questions are great. The issues of scale. This is more of a comment than a question, so I guess if it brings anything up. The issues of scale are essential if we are going to reintroduce the characteristics of ethics in the culture of agriculture. Scale is what is demanded by financial capital elements, and there is too often only a mere nod to the approaches that truly respect natural capital.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Agreed. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. But what's the question?
Yeah. Well, he has another question after this. He's asking about almonds in Spain. So in the Spanish example, how is it that almonds were selected as demands for water by almonds is so great, he says. What other species for growing out was considered that determines that almonds was best?
Yeah, no, first of all, the almonds in Spain are different than the almonds in California. So the almonds in Spain can grow, are all rain fed. So they were there already. I mean, we didn't introduce almonds there. It was already a hotspot of almond cultivation there. But the risk that almonds cannot survive there because of the decrease of rainfall, the Sahara Desert isn't so far, is really a threat to the almond farmers over there. So the whole almond system there was based on you could say increasing erosion, increasing tilling, and there was not a natural way of looking into what is a regenerative almond system. We introduced that there, and what you now see is that increasingly people are going to plant more almond trees, holm oak trees around those almond groves, and that vegetation cover within the almond tree monoculture is increasing, with different type of beans. And that people already see that, and some farmers started to do this quite early, a few years ago, that yield is increasing, and we foresee that other crops can be introduced in that agroforestry system. And farmers are now piloting with pistachios a lot, for instance. So pistachio is a new introduced crop that is doing pretty well in that area. And in some areas where there's more humidity, nuts, walnuts can do, and some lower areas you find olives.
All right, great. We have David Shaw. Hi, David. We've met once or twice, and we've been chatting online lately. He's involved also with the planning for the Theory U ecosystem restoration councils in the spring in California.
Okay.
So we've been, which I know you know about. So he says, I'd be curious. So there's 2 questions in this question, and then he has another one. The first one is if it's possible for the slides to be available, the PDF perhaps. He does some work with UC Santa Cruz and the agroecology department.
So first, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So first he says, I'd be curious if Willem would make the slides available as well. That would make it easier for me to share the story with a few key colleagues, he says.
Mm-hmm.
He says, no big deal either way. That's fine. Okay. Great. What's the best way? Just email or something?
Yeah, I can send you a PDF with the slides.
Okay, great. And I could connect you guys. And then he says also, if you will be in California at any time, I would love to host you for a talk on the UC Santa Cruz campus in collaboration with the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. Do you have any trips planned?
No, not yet, but I would say invite me and send me a mail on the dates, and let's find out when I can come over. You know, the thing is, I've never been in California in my life, but I've been in the United States. But this place is new to me, and it's on my list already for a long time. So I think it would be good to if you could organize something where I could say something and go into debate with other people would be lovely. I think California, you know, I know California, and I know a lot of people from California, and of course I read the newspaper. I know what's happening over there with agriculture. For me, it's just as an observation from a foreigner. For me, it's always a little bit strange that the place where so many innovation is born, you could say. Also, other news is reaching us about degrading land use systems, forest fires, and so on. And for me, sometimes what I see, and I find that in many places, that if you divide the technical world from the natural world, problems will arise, and quite often the whole issues on sustainability, people tend to solve that with technical solutions. But we first need to go back to ourselves and our relation to nature to look into, what can nature bring and how can technology help us, instead of going first to technology and then to nature. And I don't know how. So for me, California is a special place because I see as an observer side that they're playing super important role in the world on technical innovations, and still you have other news that is reaching us on degradation of natural systems. And I would like to know more about how that is working, if you have the most brilliant people living there. So question mark. Don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry for this small observation.
Yeah. All right. David also asks his next question, speaking more about California. Willem, what questions do the folks that are helping to organize the ecosystem restoration theory U councils that we just talked about in the spring, what questions should we be asking ourselves as we plan? And what are the most important and urgent questions you would put forward to Californians who have not yet thought about the power and potential of this work? I think he's talking about the council work, or maybe the work in general. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. First of all, I would like to with some people look very carefully on the map of California. What's going on there? Where are the huge areas where on water consumption, high efficiency agriculture, monoculture? Where are the protected areas? What are the real issues behind the forest management plans over there? And I was wondering whether there is in California, or whether people already did pilots with holistic landscape designs, where you look into a whole scale area. Is there any example in California, for instance, where people, whether there are some networks or universities or NGOs or local governments are talking to each other to look into a real holistic landscape design plan with a long-term vision? Is there any example within California that is taking place at the moment? Yeah. I don't know.
Well, there are. The councils is one example of it. There's going to be all sorts of organizations involved in both the Southern California and Northern California. That Dave's even more involved with the Northern, but we're all talking about it all. But also agencies. It's the idea is a really wide net, including practitioners on the ground and policy people, and I know similar sorts of things are happening in Butte County, where the Camp Fire happened. Out of crisis and necessity, this sort of council is happening as we speak, and it's been happening. Fish and Wildlife and local organizations and county. All these folks are starting to dialogue about how to empower the people to help do the work and have the resources of the agencies and large organizations working together with the people in a harmonious way. So this question's very alive in California, and I'm really interested in the Butte County example because crisis so often forces us to do what we would take a long time to do if we were just streaming into it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so you know, I'm really very much happy to share our learning so far with you folks in California, and I think, you know, the time is ripe, and you have the potential and the money and the financial resources to go into, and also the technology to make things happen faster than in many areas of the world. So so in a way, your crisis could be a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Benjamin Jansen. Hey, Benjamin. He says, I see that there is a symbol for wineries on the Altiplano map legend. Are there any projects currently or in the works that utilize breweries? He says, and by the way, thanks for looking at the slide so closely. That's awesome. He says, I'm ready to take no for an answer about the breweries because brewing uses excessive amounts of water without counting the water used in the malting process. Also, coming from an annual plant rather than a perennial adds ecological costs if no-till ag isn't used. He says, however, a positive I heard recently is that the spent grains can be used somewhere in the process of growing mushrooms. So breweries is the question. Yes, a very important question.
It's so funny. Yes, you know, yes, a very tiny initiative has been started to start a 4-tons brewery in the Altiplano. And yes, there is some wine coming from that area, but it's not. It is still tiny because the altitude is you know, we're talking about 1,000 meters or higher sometimes, and you can find better wines in a little bit lower area, in more lower areas. But yes, you have some wineries, and the brewery one day will start. So one day you can obtain local beer there. That's what I know.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. Timothy O'Shea has another question. So he's wondering, so is Commonland about 3 to 5 years into its existence?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we started in 2013, basically in some institutes because that gives you license to operate, like IUCN and a business school and some others. But yeah, we started, I founded it in 2013. And and we are in so after the theoretical work, we started in the practical and in the field in beginning 2014.
And then the second part of that, he asks, are the philanthropies at the early stages that are looking out 20 years, are they local to the Netherlands?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. So when I started Commonland and coming from an NGO called IUCN for many years, I realized, you know, I didn't want to waste my time too much to work through projects by raising money for projects and then build a team. That takes you a lot of time. So I considered Commonland as a project, and I spoke to some philanthropists in the Netherlands first, and ask them, if you see me as a philanthropic project, I need a team to make this happen, a multidisciplinary team of the best experts who can do this. Are you willing to support me? And after 1 year of hearing no and no and no, the first, I was in touch with a very great philanthropist and a businessman, and he was also a farmer. He is also a farmer, and he said, this needs to be done, and you're doing such a critical work. I want to join you in your quest, and you come up with your ideas and network, and I bring the money, and you bring on board the best people you can find. And that's how we started. And now we are supported by British, Belgium, and this Dutch philanthropists, and also the Dutch National Postcard Lottery, which is a philanthropic institution. And increasingly with locally some governments, you know, the Andalusian government, the Dutch government, South African Eastern Cape government, and increasingly also in Australia, they start to help with implementation. But yeah, this is still, you could say, we call it the creating conditions money, and this will never go away. You need it, but of course, our aim is to get hold to the big chunk of money that you can find at investment funds. But therefore, we need to transform investment fund managers as well in their thinking, as I said before. That takes time. So yes, we started with philanthropic money. We are still dependent on philanthropic money, but the case in Australia has learned us that we are able to attract commercial money as well.
Great. And then one more from Timothy, and then if Galaxy J7 Prime, if you want, you can type your name in the chat too, because I'd like to. You might be somebody I know. I'm not sure. Timothy also asks, is your advisory work gaining some revenue with international groups? Do you feel like you just answered that one too, or is there something else to add on that?
Sorry, what? Can you repeat it?
If your advisory work is gaining some revenue with international groups, I guess that was a follow-up of the last question. It's the same guy.
So the advisory work with international groups?
Yeah, it was the same as same person as the last question. So it was kind of following up, I guess, on where the support is from. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, just so what we realized in 2016, we realized that more and more actors came to us with the question, help us to establish a for returns approach in a certain area. But we couldn't do that because we just were too small. And so we set up this advisory service, and we started with some examples of parties who are willing to support us, pay the people who are helping them. And we are now doing that. We recently started after 2 years of talking with the Red Cross in Haiti, which is a huge task, of course. And with the Nature Conservancy, they started to become very interested, and they contacted us from London, from their London office, and we are now identifying an area in India with with TNC India to start a for returns landscape process as well in India, and that will be supported by an external funder, which we found from Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. The next question. So Nick put it in the chat box, but I'll read it. It's a little harder to find, so put them in the Q&A, but we got it right here. So Nick Bertulis. Hey, Nick. He's also involved in organizing those councils in California. At the Regeneration Festival, when driving out to the restoration camp there on the land, he said, we saw huge almond monocultures on bare soil with no terraforming. My question is, have there been any attempts to work with these perimeter farmers on common land metrics? If so, why aren't they adopting region systems?
Yeah, they're very good questions. Yeah, if you go there, we're talking about 1 million hectares, so it's not a small area. Many of the farmers, so within that area, 250 farmers and local authorities and experts from the protected areas are a member of Alvelal. So they are now working and starting to implement the regenerative practices. But there's still a lot of farmers out there who are conventional. There's still investors who invest in in monocultures of lettuce. It consumes a lot of illegal water, you could say. So yeah, we just started, and this is the way. Just money talks here as well. So I give you one example. You saw my last slide, and that last slide was about I don't know where. Yeah, no, I didn't show my last slide. You could see on the left a farmer who started with regenerative practices only 1.5 years ago, and on the right a traditional, conventional farmer with tilling and bare soil, almost creating a desert. And so I asked our farmer whether she has been talking to her neighbor. And she said, yes, very often. And you know what the neighbor said about her way of farming? The neighbor said, you know, you have a mess. You make a mess out of it. My area is nice and tidy. So but as soon as sea will have less costs and more water and more yield, I'm sure that the conventional farmers in that area will change and will adhere to this new system. So this it will take time. We can't change 1 million hectares in just 4 years. We started with nothing, and now we have 250 members, and I think that change will, it will happen.
Yeah. And just because the farmer's right next to the camp doesn't mean that they're one of the first. Yeah.
Oh no! Can you imagine that camp was there, and before there was nothing. So the camp was there with some foreigners for 3 days, and that might open up their eyes also a little bit. What's happening there, and so on. So these changes will go slowly, but sometimes, and that's our hope, it can go faster than you can imagine. And then, the money is issue. So if we can create that, so that's why this Almendrehesa company is critical, because that farmer he's talking about is a large farmer of he has more than 4,000 hectares. So it's a large farmer, and so if that farmer changes, smaller farmers will follow him. But we will see. I hope within 2 years we have convinced this guy.
Great. All right. Galaxy J7 Prime says that's
Wow.
I assume that's the name of his phone or laptop. Hey all, wondering where is the best source for the data of alternative ecological solutions we can show our local governments and agencies. Here in Butte County, California, we are at the point, that's where the campfire is. And Galaxy, I don't know, you're probably involved with the campfire restoration project group there. But we are at the point where we are accumulating that data and would be huge leverage when dealing with potential funders and policymakers. We have a lot of observational data, have collected some scientific data, but need more sources.
I can't agree more. I mean, I think this is, and that's why I think California is important. This is all about data. Data will help us a lot, just to we as Commonland now are looking into what is our next step. If you look at our website, you can't find a lot of things I've just explained, because we haven't been working on our website for a year. Our website is out of date, and our communication is out of date because we were focused on making the case happen in the field. That's where it should be. But what I see is that in the future we probably will change much more in a kind of a platform where we want to collect the right data and offer the right data to everyone who wants to work with it, because that is where probably scale can come in. So there's a lot of unclosed, unlocked data in scientific institutions, and we increasingly see that those combined zone areas of agroforestry systems are just more productive. The only thing is they probably also need more labor to get the yield out, and that is the next challenge I think we need to face. Do we find people who would like to work there, or can we make it very attractive to work in those areas? That is a critical issue. Just an example, in Australia, we have everything in place now, but which youngster of 25 years or 30 years or even younger want to live in the remote areas where it takes you 3 hours drive to go to the cinema and find other youngsters in the pub? That is tough. So social issues are critical here as well. Not only so it's data is super important, but also social coherence. Building communities in rural areas.
Yeah, great. And Galaxy J7 Prime just typed in the box that it is Matthew. That's what I was thinking it might be. And he's a friend of mine. He's one of the main organizers of community efforts, the Campfire Restoration Project down there. And that I mentioned is working with like the county and Fish and Wildlife and local organizations. So that's Matthew. Matthew, do you want to say anything? I got you unmuted. Are you there? Nah, okay. He must be in a weird technological situation. But yeah, he's Matthew. He's one of the organizers down there in Butte County, and that community's doing great work. So
Okay.
About a lot of these things. Yeah. So that's great. That is, I think, it for the collected questions. I got a question.
Okay.
And then we're almost to the end of our time here. So my question involves your crystal ball just a little bit. So in the future, when we think about the system of natural zones, combined zones, and economic zones, then do you see that shifting over time? So for instance, combined zones becoming more like natural zones as we learn more about ecology and things, and then some economic zones kind of becoming mixed zones, combined, some economic zones becoming combined zones. Do you see that sort of thing? And then I was going to maybe ask, after that general question, if in particular you could talk about with peatlands, what does it look like, the shift from what sort of systems to wet systems? And maybe mention polluticulture, because it was in a slide, but I don't think you mentioned it. So that's a lot there, but yeah.
Yeah, now first your first question. I think so how I look to these kind of things. I let's say this is more like a visionary thing, of course, but I foresee that if we can create large combined zones where you have regenerative agroforestry-like systems, or agro wetlands, whatever systems, where you use, whether it's a grassland, a wetland, or a forest system, where you use the power of those, let's say, original land system or ecosystems, you can produce a lot of food, fibers, proteins, fats, etc. And increase biodiversity. What you still need is to create the connections with ecological corridors between the protected areas. And the protected areas should be, or the natural zones, whether they're protected or not, the natural zone should be big enough to sustain sufficient biodiversity. Because that biodiversity is your life assurance. Without those natural zones, the combined zone will be not resilient enough. Because you need to have a genetic flow, you need to have sufficient carbon, water, and plague, pest control systems, natural pest control systems, and so that is critical. So far, it means that many monocultures that are economic zones now will move towards the combined zone and become combined zone, or more restorative, regenerative agriculture places. You will probably still have monocultures, but those monocultures will be much more organic, with not too many pests and not too many chemicals, and maybe we didn't touch upon the topic of GMOs, of course, but here that discussion will continue. So high-tech monocultures that are more and more sustainable, I foresee that those places will remain, especially in the when you look towards the larger commodities like soy and cereals. But I don't know that the economic zone will be the economic zone. I think there the technology will change our way of living in a much more sustainable way, and that is a that will be much more intertwined with the combined zone.
Right.
So the connection between the economic zone, the infrastructure, the cities will be much more connected to the combined zone, because quite often the natural zone is just too far away.
Right.
Is that an answer to your question?
Yeah, it sure is.
And then your second question was about
peatlands in general in the Netherlands, and what sort of systems you're shifting from and to. And
yeah, probably shift from livestock to paddiculture, a different type of paddiculture, or you will have livestock, but then with different varieties of cows. You know, the current cow varieties are probably are not too resilient to, you could say, wet feet.
Right.
And so you need to look into different varieties, maybe older varieties who were there before.
Right. Yeah, different water level.
Yeah, so but you know, one thing is you need to raise a little bit the water level probably to make the system more sustainable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that word was polludiculture, right? That you were saying, right?
Polludiculture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Polludiculture. Sorry.
Wet agriculture. Fascinating. I think we'll have to do a webinar just on that sometime. Maybe.
Sorry for it's not as polludiculture. That's right.
Great. Yeah. I think I'm going to ask Hans Houston to do one on all that one of these times. But we got one more great question from Benjamin Hansen, and it relates to what you said about the combined zones and how you think they'll be closer to cities. He's asking about cities and metropolitan areas. So has your work brought you to new insights or philosophies on the role of a city or large metropolitan areas? Some of what you spoke about connects with the very long trend in human history of people moving into cities from their rural life, becoming economically devalued. Common lands projects appear to reverse this. Lots of farms benefit from being close to heavily populated areas with high income densities. So thoughts on cities?
Yeah. Yes, many things on cities. You know, for myself, I'm a kid that was raised in Amsterdam, in a city. I live a little bit outside the city, but still nearby, but in a more natural area. But what is cities? It's interesting from a biodiversity point of view. You see more biodiversity now in cities than in the rural countryside, in the monoculture areas, because the biodiversity has been degraded in those areas. And in cities, you see an increase of all kinds of species, because there are a lot of niches that people have created where different kinds of species can survive. So that is an interesting thing, an interesting insight.
Yeah.
Thought that was cities or urban areas were deserts of biodiversity. We now understand that sometimes those cities can be refugial areas for some species like bees or insects or other species. Because we have, there's no production there, less pesticides or whatever. And maybe the pollution can sometimes even help with some species like rats and whatever. From a societal point of view, and having been in a lot of those mega cities in the world, I feel always a bit. The insight there is that in a way, mega cities will give people more security, because if you live in rural areas in Africa or Asia, where tribes are still fighting and guerrilleros are and so on, you know, security is a huge issue. But if we can find a more balanced situation between rural areas and let's say higher development or and good connectivity in rural areas, I'm pretty convinced that there will be a trend coming up now that people are leaving cities, and we already see it a little bit in Australia and a little bit in Spain, but also in some other areas, also in the Netherlands, where people are leaving the cities and going back to more rural areas. But we need to make sure that we create those conditions, the right conditions, that it is safe and good living in those rural areas with with technology, with connectivity, and so on, and of course make sure that we don't destroy the rural area. I mean, I think that is probably the best condition you can do. But so I don't know whether the trend of more and more people going to urban areas will continue. I think we are nearing a tipping point here. Or maybe this is not scientific proof. It's more that's what I hope. But it's also what I see, and maybe you see it as well.
Yeah. I definitely. I think I see that pattern for sure. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of vectors happening at once here. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
A
lot of things going on. It's
a
beautiful time to live in a way.
Yeah. Then Benjamin says on wetland livestock, he was thinking like water buffalo maybe have semi-equivalent niches. That's kind of, I think that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
And then he says maybe it would be just a diverse array of beavers along with local ruminants or something. Yeah, he said beavers. Thanks for mentioning the beaver, Benjamin. Yes. Any work with the Biesbosch folks or any beaver type stuff?
The funny thing is beavers were brought back in the beginning of the 80s in the Netherlands, and they're now already starting to become a plague. So people are trying to look into how they can get rid of it. So it's an interesting phenomenon that after a few years ago, the beaver were very scarce, and now some farmers say, those beavers are ruining my territory, so can't we can get rid of it? And but they're still protected. But yeah, beavers are super important because they create diversity.
Yeah.
And but in a very, I can imagine in the United States or in Canada, where you have still so much land, we are very small, very densely populated, I don't know how if you know how big Holland is, but we are like almost a little bit double the size of Long Island, and we have 17 million people. So we're not a big this is not a big country. Yeah.
Are folks working with flow devices to mitigate conflicts with beaver? So for flooding and things like that, like pond levelers and
we do.
You do. Good. Great. Very cool. Glad we mentioned the beaver at the end there. I love the beaver. I think that is it for our questions. Thank you so much, Willem. This has been really great. I appreciate you and everybody coming with all your questions, and feel like we all have a lot to learn and think about. And we have a couple of greetings. David says,
most welcome. And most welcome to everybody. And I will make sure that you'll get the PDF.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Willem, Tim, and everyone. Lots to learn from and reflect on, says Dave. Vershka says, thank you to all and a regenerative and abundant new year to everyone. Well, it's a good greeting. And I want to remind everyone that this webinar is put on by the Ecosystem Restoration Camps Foundation, which I donate my time to do this once a month because I believe in the work that they do. And if you also want to support them, there'll be the website at the screen at the end, so you can be a supporting member. And then if you want to check out my podcast, Muse Ecology, at museecology.com, that link will be there too. So thank you all so much for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next month. Thank you again, Willem. You have a beautiful night, and I'll have a beautiful day.
Have a good day. Thank you, Tim. Take care.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.